welcome to this Settlement 101, playing fiddle styles on the cello. My name is Peter Oswald. I'm a cello teacher and string orchestra director at Settlement, among other things. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how to play some of these fiddle styles on the cello. Now, you might not immediately think about fiddle music when you see a cellist, but there is a historical precedence for playing fiddle music on the cello. Back when double basses were sort of rare in America, so a few centuries ago, oftentimes the cello would stand in because it was a little bit easier to carry around and move around. So the cello is not a new instrument in the fiddle family, but there's a lot of young, hip players now playing fiddle music on the cello, and I at least consider myself sort of one. Anyway, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got into this music, and then talk about some techniques that I use that might be a little bit different than your normal classical cello techniques. I'll play a few more tunes, and then we'll see how it goes. That first tune I did is called Boy, Them Buzzards Are Flying, and that's by a fiddler named Gary Harrison, one of my favorite fiddle players. No longer with us, but it was a 20th century fiddle player. Alright, so how did I get into this? I had sort of a normal classical cello training through high school and college. Played a lot of the concertos, all the Bach pieces, you know. But I always had a sort of an interest in other music. First that was like rock music and jazz. But interestingly enough, when I was doing my master's at Eastman, there was a bunch of string students who were also playing a lot of cool fiddle music and a lot of folk music. And that was really the time that I started getting interested in this, learning tunes by ear, doing a little improvisation, all those things. And since then, I've continued to explore a lot of these styles and sounds. I play in a band now called Under the Yoke. It's sort of a folky band, and I love to go to bluegrass and old-time jams and try to make this thing fit in there. A few notes about the styles. So when you think fiddle music, you might think bluegrass, you might think country. There are a ton of different fiddle styles, both in American traditional music and all around the world. And they have a lot of similarities, but they also have a lot of differences. The place I found myself most comfortable was sort of in the old-time world. If you're not familiar with that genre, it's sort of the predecessor to bluegrass. So this is Southern Appalachian tunes, mostly banjo, fiddle, guitar, some bass, and some cello as well. Not so much the newer bluegrass style that came on the radio in the mid 20th century, but sort of older stuff. Anyway, that's what I'll talk about today. I'll throw in some bluegrass stuff and a few other styles, but I'm really personally myself focused on the old time style. All right, let's talk a little bit about some things I do differently when I'm playing as opposed to being a classical player. One thing you might notice is my cello is in a fairly upright position. It sort of looks like maybe how you would imagine Pablo Casals playing with, that very upright. It's not the Rostropovich out here playing all up like that. And the reason for that is really the bowing. So when you're in at this angle, the bowing, the fast bowing back and forth, and then again any kind of rhythmic or chopping becomes much, much easier than if you were to put your cello up there. If you play up like this, you have a really great time up here in thumb position, but it doesn't give you that same sort of oomph in your right hand. My bow hold stays pretty much the same. So if you watch traditional fiddle players, they do a few things differently. One of them is fiddle players will tend to over-pronate like this, just to give themselves a little bit more power in that downstroke. And you might even see some people choke up on the bow a little bit like that and play like that. Those two things don't work on the cello because everything is backwards. So on a fiddle, your downstroke is taking you towards the highest string, towards the E string. On the cello, your downstroke is taking you towards the low string, the C string. So everything gets turned around a little bit. So rather than over-pronating, you oftentimes see cellists, and I sort of got this from Rashad Eggleston, who I think is probably one of the best fiddling cellists out there. But sort of I tend to turn my hand back like this, put a little bit more weight on the back side, and then make it real loosey-goosey so I'm not stuck in that position at all. So you can see that I'm mostly back here and then using that upstroke to get a little bit here. A few other things that I might change. I'm generally not doing a whole lot of vibrato. I might throw in a little bit here and there, but for the most part, this is a vibrato-free style. One of the other things is the prominence of slides and glissandos. So you might have heard that in that first tune when I do something like. We hear that that's sliding up to each of those notes, especially when you're playing a drone note that's the same note. So I'm playing open A and then also the note, the A on the D string. So I'll get a. That is a real common thing, gives you that sort of dirty fiddle style. As far as bowing goes, there are a few different bow strokes or bow styles that fiddle players might use, but the most common is called a shuffle bow. If you're learning, if you're looking at a fiddle book, or maybe you're taking a beginning fiddle class, this is oftentimes just notated as up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Which is a good way to think about it. For all of these bow strokes, we're going to be using a whole lot less bow. So rather than sort of your classical style, we're going to just try to use like a teeny tiny bit of bow. So it's almost not even like you're doing 3 bow strokes. Those become just sort of part of this da 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 da. So you might start off playing, but as you get faster, it becomes more of this sort of bounce on those seconds. So much so that it almost starts to feel like a down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, and that second articulation is just coming from a little accent in the bow. Let me show that one more time. And again, in the context of a tune, that might sound like. You can hear also that I'm not just playing one note. A common thing across all fiddle styles is to do some kind of drone or double stop. And depending on the tuning and what chord you're playing, and what key you're in, you might be able to use the string right next door to you. For example, this tune is in A, so a fiddle player would be able to play an A or an E for most of the chords. Because I'm playing the cello, I don't have an E string. I have to sort of come up with some other ways of doing those drones. So one of them that I mentioned earlier would be to slide up to that fingered A on the D string while I'm playing the open A, and you hear that sort of at the second phrase of this. And then the whole rest of that passage I'm able to drone on the A while I'm playing the melody on the D string. After that, I'm jumping up to the A string, so I have to come up with some drone note, and because I don't have an E string, then I'm using first finger down here on my D string instead. And you hear that I'm not staying on that E the whole time. And that's just because sometimes the drone notes don't need to be super present. You don't want to always be hitting that drone note on every single note. You want the melody to come through. In the same way, in Bach, if you're playing chords, you want the melodic note to come through and you just want the rest to support. Also, there's just technical reasons that I can't keep that drone going, so I'm going to switch that up and not play that all the time. All right, so let's take that that shuffle bowing, and see if we can sort of put a tune with it. So let's just start on our D and our A string. So we're going to get that shuffle bow going. And I'm just going to take a few notes on the A string and add them in to make a melody. So let's go over that first. This is a really common tune called Old Joe Clark. Normally this tune is played in A, but for drone reasons, I'm taking it down to D, just to make it a little bit easier on the cello. So just quickly, the melody is... That's the A part. part, so we would do that twice, and then the B part's a little bit different, but we'll get to that in a second. So I'm going to take that single line melody, that's sort of that long classical style, and now I'm going to add that shuffle bow to it to give it that, that fiddle feel. So you can hear there, that really like brings up the energy in the tune as opposed to, which is fine and nice, but doesn't really give you the style we're looking for there. A few other things we can do with this tune would be to add some melodic variations. So these tunes generally have a set melody, but that melody can be varied and made more complex or less complex when you're playing or with the jam. So it's sort of this improvisation that's, it's not like a jazz solo where you come up with something completely new, but you might throw in a little ornament here or an ornament there, or a different rhythm to change up the tune a little bit. And some of those are just sort of like built into your memory. So for example, this first one, this is one you just hear a lot of fiddle players do, and then other times you'll sort of like find something in the moment that works. So instead of playing, we're going to do, there, I'm still following the general contour of the melody. I'm still hitting the main melodic notes, but I'm also adding some little extra stuff in there. The way someone explained to me once is that you go to an old-time jam or you go to a bluegrass jam, and everyone's playing the melody. The bass player is playing the melody, the guitar player is playing the melody, even though that melody might be, if you're playing the bass part, but that's sort of like the simple, most basic part of the melody, and then each instrument adds on to that in a way. So the banjo player might be playing something more like just sort of an outline of that melody, and then on top of that the fiddle player might be doing even more notes. So together you're all sort of playing this melody together, but everyone has slight variations on it. One of the other really common variations is to just add an anticipation, a rhythmic anticipation, generally at the beginning of the tune, but you can put it in anywhere. So I'm going to play through this A section twice now, and you can hear the second time through, maybe I'll do it a few times, I'm just jumping forward a little bit on that very first note. So instead of playing, well, here you go. Forward a little bit. That gives it a little bit more rhythmic interest as opposed to just playing everything right on the beat. All right, so we did a little Old Joe Clark, some melodic variation, a few different bowing things. The great thing about the cello is that it can be a melodic instrument or it can be a substitute for a backing up instrument. So that could be a bass or guitar or mandolin. And all those parts fit really, really well in the cello. So probably the simplest part would be the bass part, and I can do that almost in the same range as the bass. The bass goes down an extra sixth below the cello, but I can hit a lot of those low notes in almost the same range, and especially if you're in a small group, you can really sound a lot like a bass player. For traditional music like this, the bass parts tend to be very simple. It's just 1 and 5, alternating between those depending on the chord. So for each of these, I'm actually going to take a new tune called Angeline the Baker. It's a real common one. It's one of the first tunes I learned, and one of the first tunes a lot of fiddle players learn. And I'm going to go through each of the parts, and then we'll sort of put them together at the end. So for the bass part, the chords are really easy. It's just G, C, G, C. So you can hear there, I'm always starting on the name of the chord, G, and then I'm going down to the 5th, which is a D. I do that 3 times. And And then the last chord is a C, so I'm playing open C, and then up to the 5th here. And that chord progression, those 4 measures, will actually work for the entire tune, which is one of the reasons I chose this one, because it's pretty simple. The chords don't change much more than that. One thing about playing bass parts on the cello, I got this from jazz players, watching some jazz players, and also other great cellists, is to turn your hand a little bit like this. So normally you would see classical cellos sort of plucking away from the cello, using just the very tip of their finger to pull that note out, which sounds great. You know, really works well for a lot of stuff. But I want to get a little bit more of a meatier sound, that lower bass sound. So I'm actually going to turn this hand sideways, just like you would see a bass player do. So the entire side of my first finger is actually what's plucking there. See also that I got my thumb hooked back here, just like you did in Suzuki Book 1, Make Your L. Just keep me in place so I'm not sliding all around. So that's one little change I would make to play the bass line. You, of course, can add a few other notes. So a bass player might do a little run at the end of a section, like... something like that. You end up doing that too much and people get a little bit annoyed because they really want that bass part keeping everyone together. But you can add in some variations like that. So we got that bass part going down. Next up, we need to have some kind of chord or rhythm section. And this would be the guitar part or the mandolin part, or oftentimes you hear cellists playing a backup part, or even fiddle players playing a backup part. And to do that, I'm going to just take the top 2 or 3 strings. So here on my first chord, G, it will be open G, 4th finger on the D, 1st finger on the G. And I'm going to do just like a boom, chuck, boom, chuck, boom, chuck, boom, chuck rhythm of that. That's the most basic pattern that's going to work with a lot of tunes. I would start there. If you want to start doing more interesting things, there are a few other variations you could do. So one of them would be to, just like that bass part is alternating low notes, I could alternate low notes on this chord. So I could do... So every other low note is actually a D instead of a G. And you even heard that at one point I did a boom, checka, checka, checka. So it doesn't need to stick to boom, check, check, check. It could be boom, checka, 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 something to make it a little more groovy. Let me try that one more time. And I'll go down to the C chord this time. And for that C chord, I'm just going to do open G, 1st finger on an E, 2nd finger on the A. Now, G is not the root of that chord, but because I have the bass player below playing a C, that's okay. I can just leave it on the G. So that would be like... etc. And you can start to hear me doing a few more rhythmic things with my right hand to add some other rhythmic variation in there. This is oftentimes called the chop. And there's a few people that claim to have invented the chop. I don't think that one person in particular did that. Daryl Anger, who's a fiddle player, has a lot of, he has a DVD where he shows you how to do this. On that DVD is actually Rashad Eggleston, the cellist I mentioned earlier. That's a great way to learn, or you just look it up on YouTube. What that stroke is basically is no longer a left to right stroke, but I'm now pushing the bow down into the string and getting it to stop and getting that cluck, or that chuck, or that chop sound. Let me just demonstrate a few times on like muted strings. Again, I'm not using any left to right motion here. I'm just hitting down to the string like that. It takes a little practice to get that, but once you get it, it can really add a lot of cool sounds into your rhythmic accompaniment. You see, I start to get a really dynamic, varying accompanying part, so it's not just sort of the same thing over and over again for whoever I'm backing up. All right, so we got the bass part, we got the chopping part or the chord part. Now we need to add the melody on top. I'll play that through a few times, and then I'm going to try to put all these parts together for the end. out in the end just to finish things up. One of the things I will do if I am accompanying myself or I'm not playing with a fiddle player is just to take this all up an octave and do it in thumb position. So this requires a little bit more finesse up here, but you can get exactly in the fiddle range just by dropping your thumb on the harmonic here. This really interesting thing that the bowing actually becomes a lot easier when I'm up here. I don't know if it's because I'm stopping the string here and there's less pressure needed, but that that shuffle bow stroke I was talking before oftentimes comes easier when I'm not dealing with the whole length of the string. I'm only dealing with half of it. So if you're struggling with that bow stroke, you may just drop down these harmonics, especially on the G and the D string. I find you can really get into that bow stroke there. All right, so I pre-recorded that bass line and that accompanying line, and now I'm going to put that all together for one final run through of Angela and the Baker. So enjoy. You'll first hear me coming in with the bass part. Again, those chords are just G and then dropping down to C. Then I'm coming in with the accompanying part, as I mentioned before, and then finally playing the melody a few times through. I'm going to do a little improvisation, so wait for that. All right, let's get going. Here's that bass part. Now the chords. There you go. Enjoyed that. I threw in a little improvisation in there after the second time through the melody, and I thought I would talk a little bit about that before we wrapped up things for tonight. As I mentioned earlier, oftentimes in old-time jams, everyone's just playing the melody the whole time through, and there's not a solo section for someone to rip out some cool licks or something. But if you do go to a bluegrass jam, that is sort of expected that you play a solo by yourself. So just thinking a few things about that. Probably the best way to start doing that is just starting to play around with the melody a little bit. So maybe becomes taking little changes to the melody. After you've sort of gotten used to that, you might start using a few different scales in place of that melody. And as is the case with a lot of improvisation, using the pentatonic scale to get started is a really helpful thing. So if you're not familiar with that, that's scale degrees 1, 2, 3, 5. So in G, that's and then 6 and 1 again. So that scale would be. Now that has a pretty cool sound to it, but it also has sort of an in-the-box sound, and you don't get any of that grit that you might want to hear in a fiddle solo. So a few things I'm doing there to change it up would be, whenever I'm hitting that B, I'll sometimes slide into it from a B flat. Or there I'm sliding that whole third up from sort of B flat, F sharp to B and G. Or just doing one going to the next. So there's that same scale, but I'm adding in that B flat below. Some other cool notes you might throw in there would be the blue notes if you're playing a blues scale. So that's adding in the flat 5, the 4, that flat 3 in there. That gives you sort of a fiddle sound. And then, as always, you want to keep it sort of like simple and melodic and interesting. You don't want to be doing all kinds of crazy notes where you're going to sound a little bit ridiculous. So finding just simple ways to change the melody or do slightly different variations on that. All right, so that wraps things up for me. I wanted to give you a few resources if you are interested in continuing to learn some about different fiddle styles on the cello. Obviously, you can come to me at Settlement. I'll be happy to work in lessons, or as I mentioned, we're doing a little bit of this in intermediate orchestra now, as much as they will let me. The students will let me, that is. But some other folks you might look to, as I mentioned before, Rashad Eggleston is probably one of the best fiddle and cello players out there. He played in a band called Crooked Still for a long time. He's no longer doing that, but he's doing a lot of his own solo stuff. He has really gone really in depth with right hand technique and that chop. Even if you just follow him on Instagram, you can see some really amazing stuff that he's working on right now. One of the first cellists that I sort of fell in love with as far as a songwriter was Ben Soli, who is a singer-songwriter. He does some Appalachian folk music. He also does some rock music. But he has a really great technique and does a lot of this stuff. Also, Natalie Haas. She is Brittany Haas's sister. Brittany Haas of Live From Here and Crooked Still and a number of other great bands. But Natalie Haas plays cello. She's really amazing because she went to Juilliard for her classical degree and now does a lot of Scandinavian and Scottish fiddle music and just has this absolutely pristine technique. You watch her right hand or even just her left hand, it's like you're watching this master cello player just doing these amazing things. So that's Natalie Haas. And then Eugene Friesen is the cello teacher at Berkeley, along with Mike Block. And they both do a whole bunch of really cool alternative styles. I had the opportunity to work with Eugene Friesen for a few years when I was living in Boston and then doing some of his summer camps. And that's not fiddle specific, it's just sort of like non-classical cello, improvisation, alternative styles, as they're sometimes called.